What you're seeing on your screen are two charts of the exact same data. Both of these are controlled by a slicer. Now the thing is, one of these charts was created using a pivot table. The other chart was created using a series of dynamic array functions. When slicers were first introduced, they only controlled pivot tables. Then in the next version of Office, their feature set was extended so they could control data tables. But I want to show you a roundabout way to get a slicer to work with almost any kind of function when it comes to filtering. So I'll admit right up front, this was much easier to build with a pivot table. But when you understand how to build this yourself using functions, this opens up a whole new world of possibilities when it comes to storytelling. So let's look at a bird's eye view of the actual mission here and what features we're going to use in Excel to build this, and then we'll perform the construction of each of these types of charts. We'll begin with a review of the GROUPBY function. This way we can understand exactly which argument it is that we'll be using with the slicer so we can do our filtering of the groups. This filtering of the GROUPBY function will be achieved using the COUNTIF function. We'll begin by filtering using a single criteria, but then we'll expand our filtering to multiple criteria where the criteria is governed by AND logic. We'll also look at filtering by multiple criteria using OR logic. Finally, we'll look at working with other function aggregators, like SUMIFs, AVERAGEIFs, MAXIFs, and MINIFs. Let's take a brief moment for a quick review of the GROUPBY function. This way, when I build the GROUPBY, you'll understand what each of these arguments is for. Now, I made a very detailed video on the GROUPBY function that you can view by clicking the link in the video description or the card in the upper right. And if you're not familiar with the GROUPBY function, I highly recommend you watch that video. But the main part of the GROUPBY function for this video is going to focus on a single argument, the filtering argument. So the GROUPBY function is broken down into these arguments. We have the row fields, which is what we're actually grouping by. We have the values field, which is what we're aggregating. Then we have the functions that we want to invoke by the GROUPBY. This would be similar to the calculations performed in a pivot table. We'll tell it whether we want to show the built-in headers, because maybe we want to use our own custom headers, where we want the aggregations, either in the total or in the subtotal section, and do we want to put those aggregations at the bottom or the top of the group. We'll look at the sorting logic, and then finally, here's where the whole crux of this video focuses, the filtering. So the row fields, this is just the column that we're going to group by. The values field, this is the column we're going to calculate. The function that we want to use, we can use any of these functions as aggregators. The field headers, these number codes tell GROUPBY whether we want to display the headings or not. The total depth, these number codes tell us, do we want grand totals and subtotals, where we want to place them, or maybe not show them at all. The sort order will allow us to sort by any column in any direction and even perform hierarchical sorts. And then finally, the filter array. This is the list of criteria that will drive whether we display or hide specific elements from the group. Be sure to download this file so you can either open up the solution file and see all of the answers for all of the projects that we're going to create, as well as opening up the starter file so you can perform these actions with me. We'll begin by creating the GROUPBY function with no filtering. Now my data set here is a proper table, and if we go up to table design, we can see that the name of this table is data1. So I'll go to E1 and we'll start by creating a GROUPBY function. The row fields, in other words, what are we going to group by? I'm going to group by state. So I'll choose the state column of the data1 table, comma. The values we want to aggregate will be the sales column, comma. What function do we want to use? And for right now, we'll just use a sub function. Do we want to show subtotals or grand totals? Well, we're not doing a hierarchy, so we won't have subtotals, but I do want to show the grand totals, and I want to show them at the bottom. So that'll be a 1, comma. I want to sort the output by sales in descending order. And since the sales column will be the second column, I'll put a 2 here. And because I want it in descending order, I'll make that a -2, comma. Now here's where we would do the filtering. Before we do, let's just see what we get without the filtering. So I'll take out that comma, put a close parentheses, hit enter, and we see that we have our output. Now the first thing I would like to do is to put my own headings in here. So if I go back into the formula and I change that 0 to a 3, in other words, show the headings, I'll get this. Now the reason I got that is because when I selected my data, I didn't select the headings with my data. So it thinks Alabama is the heading. I'll go back into this formula and let's take this row fields. If I select the data and the heading and then do the same thing for the values field, select the data and the heading. Now when I hit enter, I get state, and I get sales. Now, I would like to do something a little fancier. I'd like it to say like state and total sales. And the reason for that is I'm going to add two other aggregations. I want to know the average sale and the number of sales. And if I use the built-in headings, my headings will just say state, sales, sales, sales. So I'm going to go back into the formula. And for my row fields, I'm just going to select the data, not the headings. For the values field, same thing. Data, no headings. For my headings argument, I'll set that back to 0. I don't want your headings because I'm going to make my own. So our first change to the group by is I want multiple aggregations. I want to show the total sales, average sales, number of sales. So back in the formula, in the function argument, I'm going to use sum, average, and count. Now I can't use those as I type them because it thinks average and count belong to other arguments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap those inside of a parentheses. Now if that's all you had to do, that'd be great, but unfortunately it's not because I want to create 3 new side-by-side columns of aggregations. And the way I'm going to do this is to have these 3 arguments controlled by an hstack function. So now when I hit enter, I get a sum, an average, and a count. These headings we will eventually replace, but for now I'm going to leave them. So the million-dollar question is, how do we get a slicer to filter this output by product? Well, remember I said slicers work with pivot tables and data tables. Since I can't get a slicer to actually influence a function, I'm going to do a little cheat workaround and have my slicer talk to a pivot table. The pivot table will then be used to filter the output of the group by. So we'll go back to the data and I'll say insert pivot table, and I'll put that pivot table, say right about here. Hit OK. And the only thing I'm going to put in the pivot table are the products. Now you can leave the pivot table as is, but I'm going to go up to design, turn off any subtotals, turn off any grand totals, and I'm also going to switch my report layout to the tabular view. That way I get my nice heading. So our products begin in J21 and go all the way down to J29. This is what the group by function is going to look at to decide how to do the filtering, is this list of products. Now to control this list, while we're on the pivot table, we'll go to pivot table analyze and we'll insert a slicer, and that slicer will be for products. And I'll put the slicer right about here. Let's stretch this out. So to test this, if I click baseballs, my pivot table is filtered for just baseballs, basketballs, footballs, golf balls. And of course you can hold down control and select multiple items. So now the question is, how do we get the group by to filter based on this product list? Well, let's just go ahead and get the function in place, and then I'll go and explain how it works. So we'll go to the group by function, go to the last argument, comma, and this is the filter array. We're going to use a COUNTIF function to check to see if the items displayed in the product pivot table are found in the product list of the data. So we'll go with a COUNTIF. The range argument will be the list of products in the pivot table, comma, and the comparison list to discover those products will be the product column of our data set. Close parentheses for the COUNTIF, hit enter, and now if I go over here to the slicer and click baseballs, we only see products for baseballs, basketballs, footballs, gloves, exercise machines. So our group by function is actually being influenced by the pivot table. The slicer controls the pivot table controls the group by. Now, as I said, this is far easier to do just in the pivot table. But once you understand the controls that have been given to you here, it unleashes a world of possibilities. Now, to help us understand what's really happening with this COUNTIF function, I have a list of names here that I have given the name list, and I have a single cell with a dropdown that allows the user to pick one of those names from that list. This specific cell I have named name. So what I'll do is I'm going to go over here to D2, and we'll start a COUNTIF function. The range will be the name I'm selecting in cell D1, comma, the criteria will be my list. Close parentheses, enter. And what that returns is a list of zeros and ones. So anywhere where Fred was found, it's a 1. Anywhere where Fred was not found is a 0. So if I were to change this from Fred to Sam, now we can see it was found in this position of the list. If we change this to Bob, now we had a discovery in this position in the list. 1 means it was found, 0 means it was not found. Now to Excel, 1 also means true and 0 means false. So we will filter by whatever is true and not filter by whatever is false. So now back over here in our filter test, let's open our formula up a little bit. If we highlight our COUNTIF function, if you look really closely right here, what you'll see are the filter results of the COUNTIF. So anywhere where there's a 0, there was not a match in that record. So in the first 8 positions of the table, we did not find tennis balls. But in the 9th position, we did, so that shows up as a 1. So we found one in the 9th position. We found another one over here in the 22nd position. We found a couple more over here. And it's those ones that are going to allow us to then filter the results of the group by to an even more granular point. Now later we'll do this with the sum ifs. We'll do it with average ifs, max ifs, min ifs. So this little tactic can be applied in a lot of different scenarios. Now let's clean up our headings. I don't like the sum, average, count headings. I'd like my own headings. So the first thing we have to do is discard the supplied headings. The way we're going to do that is we'll wrap our group by function in a drop function, and we'll tell it to drop the first row of the table. Close parentheses, enter. But now we're back to the group by, assuming that the first discovered row is the header row. So let's stick a header on top of this using VStack. So in front of the drop function, we'll start a VStack function, and the first thing we want is our heading row. This will be our custom headings. Now this list of custom headings will be supplied as a list, and lists always go in curly brackets. So in the curly brackets, we'll put double quote state, comma, total sales, comma, average sales, comma, and number of sales. Now we have to go to the end, add another close parentheses for the VStack, hit enter, and now we have custom headings. This formula is getting a bit long, so let's go ahead and open up our formula bar. So we started with the group by just to create the groups. Then we use the COUNTIF to filter those groups. We then use the drop function to discard the original heading supplied by the HStack aggregations, and then use VStack to create our own custom heading. I know it looks like a lot, but once you understand what each piece is responsible for, it's just a matter of putting those pieces together. I'll collapse that. And now just to give it a good test, here's baseballs, basketballs, rowing machines, tennis balls. Now let's see how we can perform compound filtering using AND logic. So say I want to show total sales by state, but maybe only for the Midwest gloves. Now this will be almost identical to what we just did, so I'm going to go through the formula rather quickly, but then the very end, that's when we'll add that second filter argument. So the first thing we're going to have to do is build 2 very small pivot tables. One so we can filter by product, and the other so we can filter by region. So let's start with region. I'll go up to table design, summarize with pivot table, and I'll place that pivot table maybe right about here. I'll populate the pivot table with region, and then I'll do my obligatory cleanup, turn off subtotals, turn off grand totals, change the layout to tabular. Next, we want another pivot table for the products. So I'll go back up to table design, summarize with pivot table. I'll put the pivot table right here. I'll populate with product, and then I'll go up, turn off my totals and subtotals, set my layout to tabular. So these 2 pivot tables are going to act as the driving filters for the group by. Now each one of these pivot tables needs a companion slicer. So for the region pivot table, we'll go up to pivot table analyze, insert slicer. This will be for region, hit OK, and I'll resize this. And we'll put it, say, right about here. Let's go to the product pivot table analyze, insert slicer, and this will be for product. Hit OK. We'll move this over here, and we'll resize it. So now to make sure these are working, if I filter by region, my region pivot table is reduced. If I filter by product, my product pivot table is reduced. Let's move our region pivot table over so it lines up with our slicer. So now for the function. We'll start with a group by. We're going to group by state, not selecting the heading, comma. We will aggregate by sales, not selecting the heading, comma. We would like to perform 3 aggregations, sum, average, and count, and those have to be controlled by an HStack so we can put them side by side. So we'll start an HStack function, and inside of HStack, we want to use a sum function, an average function, and a count function. We don't want any headings, so 0. We want to show totals, but at the bottom, so that's a 1, comma. I want to sort by the sum of the sales in descending order, so -2, comma. And now for our filter array, let's just start with the region filter. So that will be a COUNTIF. Our range will be the output of the region pivot table, and our scan range will be the region column. Close parentheses for the COUNTIF, close parentheses for the group by. Now let's test it. Midwest, Northeast, South, West. Now just to build out the rest of the formula, we want our own headings, so we're going to need to drop the original headings of the aggregations. So that will be a drop function, and we want to drop the first row. But now we have to supplant that with our own headings. So we'll go back to the beginning before the drop and place this drop group by combination inside of a VStack function. So the top part of the vertical stack will be our custom headings. This is a list, so that goes in curly braces. And in that list, our state, total sales, average sales, number of sales. We need to go to the end so we can place a closed parentheses for our VStack, Control Enter. Now we have our custom headings. So let's test it out. Midwest, Northeast, South, and West. But what if I want to show West only for exercise machines? How do we get that second filter? So what we need to do is let's go back into our formula, and it's right here, the COUNTIF. We need to somehow get two COUNTIFs in here and have them talk to each other. So to do that, I'm going to go after the first COUNTIF and type in an asterisk. The asterisk symbol is the symbol we use for an AND operation. And then we just write another COUNTIF function. This time we're going to look at the output of the product pivot table. That will be our range, comma, and we'll scan the product column of the data table. Close parentheses for the COUNTIF. We'll hit enter. See, now if we filter for baseballs or basketballs or footballs, we only get filters for those products. If we filter for a region, we only get filters for those regions. And if we said something like the South, footballs, then you have to be in the South region and you have to be selling footballs. So it's these two COUNTIFs that are working together under the control of an asterisk or an AND logic. But what if I wanted to work under the confines of an OR logic? So you could be either South or football. So we'd see all South transactions and all football transactions. All I have to do is change this asterisk to a plus. Because with Excel's binary logic, plus is an OR. So we'll hit enter. I'll clear both of my slicers. So if I select Midwest, I'm looking at all Midwest, but I'm also looking at all products, which is basically all regions in this data set. So we have to engage two filters to see any type of change. Because if you only filter for product, but you're still looking at every single region, you're going to get all the records, because all the records are in the regions. Likewise, if you only filter for one region, but you're not filtering for products, you're looking at Midwest, but you're still looking at every product you've ever sold, regardless of region. So we need to invoke two different filters. So here I've invoked the Midwest region and exercise machines. Now I'm seeing every state in the Midwest region, and I'm seeing every exercise machine sale. So if you're Midwest exercise machines, I'm seeing you. But I'm also seeing every other exercise machine sale regardless of region, because you can see there's some Virginia in here, there's an Alabama, but I'm also looking at every Midwest sale regardless of product. So there could be some Midwest sales in here where the sales average and number of sales are including other products. So plus would be an OR, asterisk would be an AND. So in this case, I'm only looking at that intersection of that Venn diagram of Midwest and exercise machines. Now let's see how we can use that single item pivot table and slicer to filter other types of Excel functions, like a filter function. So let's filter a filter function. Here I have a list of product, state, and sales, and I would like to return all of the complete records for a selected product. So begin with a filter function. This table, by the way, is named Data4. I'll go up here to the corner and select the entire table, Data4, comma, what do I want to include? This is where we're going to use that COUNTIF function. So I'll do a COUNTIF. My range is the list of products from the pivot table, comma, my criteria is the product column, no headers, close parentheses for the COUNTIF, close parentheses for the filter. Let's hit enter and see what we get. Right now we're returning all records, but if I click baseballs, we only see transactions for baseball sales, basketballs, footballs, gloves. Now I still have the problem of the headings. I need to customize that. But I'd also like to create a custom sort, because even though I know these are all exercise machines, I'd like to sort it by state so my longer list can go everywhere from Alabama to Wyoming, and then within each state, do a secondary sort in descending order by the sales. So we'll go back up to the front of our filter function and we'll wrap this inside of a sort function. So the array is the output of the filter function. The sort index, in other words, which columns do I wish to sort by, I need to provide it a list of columns. When you're going to sort by multiple columns, you need to provide those numbers within a list. So that's going to be a set of curly braces. My primary sort will be the state column, which is the second column. My secondary sort will be the sales, which is the third column, comma. Now the ascending descending order. I want to sort each column differently, so I have to supply this information within another list, so curly braces. The state column will be sorted in ascending order, which is a 1, and the sales will be sorted in a descending order, which is -1. Close parentheses for the sort. Now we're sorted in ascending order by state, and then followed by descending order of sales. I need to put my custom header into this, so back to the beginning of the function. This is the job of VStack, And I don't need to create custom headers because I just want to use the headings of the original table. So I'll just select the heading row of the original table. That will be the first row of my vertical stack. And then underneath that will be the output of the sort filter combination. All I need to do is go to the end of this and give it a close parentheses for the VStack. So now we're using a slicer to filter a filter function. For our last example, this would be best suited for something like a dashboard. So here I want to see total sales, average sales, the best sale, and the worst sale for a given product line. Well, I've got a slicer over here, and when I click from product to product, I can retrieve those answers. Now in this situation, I'd like the user to only select one product at a time. So if they select multiple products, I'll tell them please select a single product. Or if they clear the slicer, please select a single product. But then when they select a single product, I give them those calculations. Now each one of these calculations is basically the same thing, just using a different aggregator. So we'll look at building the first one. Now let's look at this formula. It looks like a lot, but let's build it in pieces, and like anything, if you take it one bite at a time, you'll get through this meal. Let's start by deleting each of these aggregations, and let's zoom out just a little bit. Now as before, we have a pivot table here, and if I clear my slicer, we can see the output of the entire product field. Since the user is going to be directed to only select one product at a time, when we run our aggregation, instead of looking at all of the output of the product pivot table, we'll only look at this very first cell, in this case J20. So that way, when they're only selecting a single product, that's the only cell that should contain information. So let's go up here and create our formula for our sum. We'll start with a sum ifs. The sum range will be the sales of this table, data 5, comma. The criteria range will be the product of table 5, comma. And we're only going to look at this one cell, J20. Close parentheses, hit enter, and we get an answer. Now this is giving us what we want, but it's not very pretty. We want to put some style on it. Now we could just go up here and give it something like a comma style or a currency style. But the problem is I want to also have an embedded title, and the moment I do that, then I can't use the styling. Because if I concatenate some text to the front of this, those styling instructions are lost. So what we'll do is we'll apply the style formulaically, and this will be done using a text function. So the text function will take the output of the sum ifs, comma, and then we'll give it the currency style. And the codes for this are $, pound sign, comma, pound, 0.00, and double quote. Close parentheses for the text, hit enter, and now we get a stylized result of sum ifs. Now if you have a keen eye, you'll notice that that number went to the left side of the cell, which indicates this is now text. Now we can concatenate to the front of that something like total sales, colon space, and double quote, ampersand for concatenation, and now we get total sales and a value. Now I would like to make this really fancy and have it say total sales for and the specific product that's been selected. So I want that title to be dynamic. So let's go back in here, take out that colon and say total sales for space, and then concatenate to that whatever the user selected in the slicer as being represented by J20 in the pivot table. And then I'll concatenate to that a colon space. Now when I hit enter, I get total sales for exercise machines, this amount of money. Total sales for basketballs, total sales for baseballs, total sales for stepper machines. So now we have the sum ifs performing a filtered aggregation based on the selection in the product pivot table. We are stylizing that output with a text function and then concatenating that to some static text and a small piece of dynamic titling. Now here's the final piece of bulletproofing. What if the user selects all of the products? Well, now it says total sales for baseballs and a really big number. Now it's showing baseballs because the pivot table is listing all of the products, but the titling is only looking at the first cell in that list. So let's build a little logic into this that says, hey, if there's more than one thing in this pivot table, then reject their request and give them some sort of custom message. So basically, if there's anything in J21, it means they've selected 2 or more items. And in our dashboard, that's not legal. So we'll go back to the formula, and we'll go in front of all of this and wrap it inside of an if function. And the if function just wants to detect if J21 is blank. Because if it's blank, that means they've only selected one thing, and go ahead and perform the math. So we'll say if is blank, and I'll point to J21. So if this cell is blank, then go ahead and do all of that work. But if it's not blank, comma, this will be the false part of the if, I'll put a message like, please select a single product. Close parentheses, hit enter. And so now if all the products are selected, please select a single product. If they select a single product, then we see the calculations. If I select more than one product, please select a single product. Now, if I would like to do the same thing for the average sale, best sale, and worst sale, I've already written the formula. I can just copy that, come down here and paste it, and then just give it a tweak. So instead of a sum ifs, we'll write an average ifs. And then, of course, we have to change our title. So instead of total sales, it would be average sale. And now the average sale for basketballs is X. If we would like to know the best sale, we can just paste that formula again, change this to best sale, and then change the base aggregation from a sum ifs to a max ifs. And now we know the best sale. And finally, for the worst sale, we'll paste that formula, change this to worst sale, and then change the base aggregation to a min ifs. And now we're looking at the worst sale. So zoom in a little bit. So baseballs, basketballs, footballs, rowing machines. So here's the formula for the first one. So now we're using a slicer to control a formula that answers a question on a dashboard. So whether you want to take an existing set of data and reduce that down to a subset with something like the GROUPBY function or the filter function to only return records of a specified criteria, or if you want to write something like this to generate responses in a dashboard, that little single field pivot table trick is ideal for these situations. So we use a slicer to control the pivot table, and the pivot table controls the output of the formula. So as stated, it probably would have been easier to do some of these things with some of the built-in tools like pivot tables to just generate this output. But I think if you understand the mechanics of what's really going on behind the scenes, now you can take more creative control of your Excel spreadsheets and produce things that the built-in features just can't do for you. So do you like this? Do you hate this? Hopefully you found something in here that can spark your imagination and help you build better pivot tables and better dashboards. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. We really appreciate it. And remember, at BCTI, the learning never stops.